There is a place in Mexico where power is measured in blood, where violence is a business strategy, and where a single organization transformed the landscape of organized crime in less than a decade. The Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, known as CJNG, didn't just enter Mexico's criminal underworld, it detonated inside it, shattering alliances, erasing rivals, and rewriting the rules of the drug trade. Today, it stands as one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere, led by a man the DEA considers their most wanted fugitive, with a $15 million reward on his head. This is the story of how a fractured criminal alliance became a paramilitary empire, and how ambition without limits brought terror to millions. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born into a world with no exit. Growing up in rural Jalisco, his family cultivated avocados, scraping together survival from the earth. Poverty defined everything. He dropped out of school in 5th grade, traded classroom desks for crop fields, and by 14 found himself guarding marijuana plantations instead of playing with friends. The mountains of Michoacán offered two futures: endless labor or the criminal economy. For a boy who wanted more than dirt under his fingernails, the choice seemed obvious. At some point in the 1980s, Oseguera crossed into the United States illegally, settling in California's San Francisco Bay Area. He was 19 when police arrested him for carrying a stolen gun and stolen property. Just 2 months after that arrest, his first child was born. He lived in liminal spaces, crossing the US-Mexico border multiple times under different names, in navigating the edges of legality. American investigators believe this was when he became involved in methamphetamine production and distribution in Redwood City, working alongside his brother-in-law, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia. After 3 years in a U.S. prison, authorities deported Oseguera back to Mexico at age 30. He returned not defeated but educated in criminal operations, connections, and the American drug market's appetite. Back in Jalisco, he joined local police forces in Cabo Corrientes and Tomatlan, a common path for men transitioning between law enforcement and organized crime. The badge didn't last. Soon he abandoned the police uniform and joined the Milenio Cartel as a full-time operative. To cement his position, he married Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the sister of one of the clan's leaders. Family ties meant survival, and they also meant access. Inside the Milenio Cartel, Oseguera, now known by his alias El Mencho, started at the bottom of the violence chain. He joined the assassin squad protecting Armando Valencia Cornelio, a high-ranking drug lord known as El Maradona. On August 12, 2003, Mexican authorities arrested Valencia Cornelio. Around the same time, a rival group called Los Zetas, backed by the Gulf Cartel, launched an armed offensive against the Milenio Cartel's operations in Michoacán. The Valencia family fled to Jalisco, regrouping in the state capital of Guadalajara. El Mencho relocated with his father-in-law and other cartel members to the city. In Guadalajara, the Milenio Cartel forged a critical alliance with a Sinaloa cartel subgroup led by Ignacio Nacho Coronel, and one of the most powerful drug lords in Mexico and a close ally of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Under Coronel's command, El Mencho managed the Sinaloa cartel's finances, drug operations, and murder squads in the states of Jalisco and Colima. He learned how billion-dollar drug empires operated. He studied power. Everything changed in July 2010 when Mexican security forces killed Nacho Coronel in a shootout. Coronel's death created a power vacuum inside the Sinaloa cartel, fracturing the organization and triggering infighting among factions scrambling to control his territory. El Mencho saw an opportunity in the chaos the Milenio Cartel split into two rival factions, La Resistencia and Los Matasetas, which El Mencho led. La Resistencia accused Los Matasetas of betraying leadership to authorities. A violent internal war erupted between the two groups, both fighting for control of Jalisco's lucrative drug smuggling corridors. Out of that blood-soaked division, the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación was born around 2009 to 2010. Initially, the group functioned as an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel, formed to counter rivals like Los Zetas and protect Sinaloa's interests in the region. But El Mencho never intended to remain a subordinate. Alongside loyalists like Eric Valencia Salazar, known as L85, and his brother-in-law Abigail González Valencia, who led the allied financial organization Los Quinis, El Mencho built something more dangerous than a cartel. He built a paramilitary force. By 2012, CJNG had defeated La Resistencia and seized control of the Milenio Cartel's smuggling networks. Within 6 months, the organization expanded its operational network from coast to coast across Mexico, becoming one of the criminal groups with the greatest territorial reach in the country. El Mencho's strategy was brutally simple: expand faster than anyone else, use overwhelming violence, and never negotiate from weakness. The cartel declared war on every major criminal organization in Mexico, including its former ally, the Sinaloa Federation, which became its most significant rival by 2014. CJNG's operational strategy was unlike anything Mexico had seen. The organization combined cartel economics with insurgent tactics, employing military-grade weapons, coordinated attacks, and propaganda campaigns. Where other cartels operated in shadows, CJNG announced its presence through terror. Mutilated bodies appeared on streets and hanging from bridges. Filmed executions circulated on social media. Narcomantas, banners with threats written in blood-red letters, warned rival groups and intimidated local populations. The message was always the same: submit or die. By 2015, CJNG controlled significant territory across Mexico and commanded the attention of the world. The organization had a presence in 23 of Mexico's 32 states and maintained alliances in all 32. Its operations stretched from the Pacific to the Gulf Coast, encompassing key trafficking routes and strategic ports. The cartel controlled Manzanillo, one of Mexico's most important deep-water ports in Colima, which allowed them to import fentanyl precursors from Asia and manage drug trafficking operations on a global scale. But the Mexican government was closing in. On May 1, 2015, the authorities spotted El Mencho in Tonaya, Jalisco, triggering Operation Jalisco, a coordinated law enforcement offensive to capture the cartel's leader. CJNG's response was unprecedented. Across the state, gunmen erected roadblocks and hijacked vehicles, forcing drivers out at gunpoint, spraying gasoline inside the cars, and setting them ablaze. 36 of the 39 hijacked vehicles burned in the streets. Then came the helicopter. As Mexican military helicopters pursued a CJNG convoy, cartel gunmen armed with Russian-made RPG-27 rocket launchers opened fire. One of the rockets struck a Cougar EC-725 helicopter carrying 18 passengers directly in the tail. The aircraft spun violently in the air, struggling to maintain control before crashing and exploding. 9 law enforcement officers died. CJNG gunmen attempted to execute survivors, but military reinforcements forced them to retreat. It was the first time in Mexico's drug war that an organized crime group shot down an aircraft. The attack sent shockwaves through Mexico and the international community. CJNG had demonstrated capabilities beyond typical cartel operations. They fought like an insurgent army. In Michoacán, the cartel conducted sieges of entire towns, deployed improvised explosive devices, and used drones for reconnaissance and attacks. Security analysts began drawing comparisons to militant groups like the Taliban. The violence wasn't limited to rival cartels or self-defense militias. CJNG escalated attacks against police, military forces, and government officials. In 2020, cartel gunmen attempted to assassinate Mexico City's police chief in a coordinated ambush. While CJNG built its reputation on extreme violence, the organization's true power came from its business operations. The cartel ran clandestine laboratories across Mexico producing fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and other illicit drugs trafficked into the United States. CJNG shrewdly capitalized on shifts in the American drug market, specializing in cocaine trafficking just as U.S. demand rebounded, outmaneuvering the Sinaloa cartel's factions. The organization built cocaine-specific supply chains stretching from South America to U.S. streets. But drugs were only part of the empire. CJNG diversified into fuel theft, timeshare fraud, migrant smuggling, and systematic corruption. The organization generated hundreds of millions of dollars through fentanyl trafficking, fuel theft, and smuggling stolen Mexican crude oil into the United States. El Mencho and senior CJNG members engaged in extortion and paid corrupt officials to expand their criminal activities. Under El Mencho's direction, operatives assassinated rivals, Mexican law enforcement officers, judges, and government officials. The cartel's territorial expansion came with deadly consequences for civilians trapped in contested zones. CJNG used violence against civilians as part of social control, measures in its strongholds, and to instill fear in areas where it fought turf wars with rival groups. States like Guanajuato, Michoacán, and Jalisco experienced significant societal erosion due to CJNG's territorial gains and control, with these regions representing over half of Mexico's total homicides in 2022. The organization targeted women to send messages to rival cartels using murder as a tactic of intimidation. The discovery of the Oseguera Ranch, a CJNG recruitment camp reportedly used to execute recruits who defied instructions, underscored the cartel's brutality even toward its own. Despite its vast power, no empire built on violence and betrayal can stand forever. CJNG's aggressive expansion faced fierce resistance from rival criminal groups who formed alliances to push back incursions. In Michoacán, self-defense groups joined forces with criminal organizations to battle CJNG forces. Territorial contestation led to sustained violence with deadly consequences for civilians. Significant increases in violence in disputed areas triggered state interventions and violent clashes between government forces and the cartel. The internal dynamics within Mexico's criminal underworld began shifting by 2024. The Sinaloa cartel, long considered CJNG's primary rival, fractured after a high-profile betrayal within its leadership. The arrest of key Sinaloa figures created desperation among its factions, particularly Los Chapitos. Strained by financial losses and weakened by sustained attacks, Los Chapitos turned to CJNG for weapons and manpower, reportedly offering access to key trafficking routes in return. The alliance was seen as a sign of desperation and potentially accelerated CJNG's emergence as one of the world's most powerful criminal networks. But alliances forged in desperation rarely last. By late 2024 and into 2025, patterns of internal reorganization and structural power crises emerged within criminal networks connected to CJNG. Security experts identified possible purges, internal betrayals, and strategic negotiations happening within allied factions. The precision of arrests and assassinations targeting key figures suggested either internal betrayals or strategic negotiations with authorities. Some experts theorize that organizations were handing over personnel in exchange for deals with law enforcement. Through it all, El Mencho remains free. He has reportedly been killed dozens of times according to rumors, yet he continues his reign in Jalisco. El Mencho has never set foot inside a Mexican prison, defined by the mythos of a drug trafficker who operates in complete invisibility. The U.S. Department of State offers a reward of up to $15 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction, the largest bounty ever offered by the DEA. Yet hundreds of people who could provide leads, including members of police forces, remain silent. The reasons for his continued freedom remain speculative. Sources suggest El Mencho has managed to make strategic moves with the right people, securing permits and arrangements that support his business operations, while the leadership maintains high-profile deals for access to Mexico's major ports. With growing U.S. demands to combat drug lords and curb fentanyl trafficking, questions intensify about why the most wanted fugitive in Mexico continues evading capture. CJNG's operational presence now extends across Mexico, with the organization maintaining control or influence in areas stretching from Chihuahua in the north, where it allied with La Línea to battle Sinaloa-connected groups, to expansion attempts into criminally crowded states like Nuevo León, allegedly supported by alliances with breakaway Gulf cartel factions. In 2024, narco banners declaring CJNG's arrival appeared in towns west of Monterrey. The geographical expansion continues driving territorial contestation over drug plazas, trafficking routes, and illicit markets. The story of CJNG is not one of triumph, but of destruction. El Mencho's journey from poverty in rural Jalisco to leadership of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations illustrates how desperation, ambition, and violence can build empires, but never sustain them. Every territory gained came at the cost of bloodshed. Every alliance forged eventually fractured. Every display of power invited retaliation. The cartel's reign of terror has devastated communities across Mexico. States under CJNG control or contestation experience sustained violence that tears apart the social fabric. Civilians caught between cartel wars, government operations, and internal purges pay the highest price. Families lose sons and daughters to recruitment, violence, or disappearance. Businesses close under extortion pressure. Government institutions erode through corruption. The organization's extreme and public use of violence, bodies on bridges, executions on social media, messages written in blood, creates psychological trauma that extends far beyond immediate victims. For those who join CJNG, the promise of wealth and power is a lie wrapped in temporary gains. Recruits who defy instructions face execution at camps like Oseguera Ranch. Key figures who rise through the ranks become targets for rival cartels, government forces, and internal betrayals. The precision of arrests and murders targeting high-ranking members demonstrates that no position offers security. Even El Mencho, despite his freedom, lives in hiding, unable to enjoy the empire he built, surrounded by enemies within and without. The business model itself is unsustainable. CJNG's aggressive expansion strategy inevitably creates more enemies than allies. Rival groups unite against common threats. Government pressure intensifies as violence escalates. International law enforcement agencies coordinate operations. The U.S. Treasury Department has sanctioned CJNG leadership, freezing assets and restricting financial operations. Every success draws more attention, more resources deployed against the organization. Internal dynamics reveal the fragility of power built on fear. The structural power crises, internal betrayals, and strategic negotiations emerging within CJNG and its allied networks demonstrate that loyalty in criminal organizations lasts only as long as profit or fear remain stronger than alternatives. When desperation drives former rivals to form alliances, those same conditions create incentives for betrayal. Personnel being handed over to authorities or eliminated in internal purges shows that the organization cannot maintain cohesion under sustained pressure. The Cártel de Jalisco Nueva Generación transformed Mexico's criminal landscape through unprecedented violence, military-style tactics, and ruthless expansion. In less than 2 decades, the organization grew from a fractured Milenio Cartel faction into one of the Western Hemisphere's most dangerous criminal enterprises. CJNG operates across Mexico and maintains international drug trafficking networks reaching into the United States and beyond. The cartel controls critical infrastructure, corrupts institutions, and kills with industrial efficiency. But history teaches a singular lesson about criminal empires. They all fall. The Milenio Cartel that gave birth to CJNG fractured and disappeared. The Sinaloa cartel that once dominated Mexico now battles internal civil war and makes desperate alliances with former enemies. Los Zetas, once considered the most violent cartel in Mexico, fragmented under pressure. Every organization that ruled through terror eventually faced the same forces it used to gain power: betrayal, violence, and destruction. For El Mencho, the ghost king living in shadows with a $15 million bounty on his head, freedom is already a prison. He cannot walk streets, cannot claim his empire publicly, cannot trust anyone completely. The same violence that built CJNG surrounds him constantly, waiting for the moment when guards lower, when allies see opportunity in betrayal, when Mexican or American forces close the final gap. For communities terrorized by CJNG operations, for families destroyed by cartel violence, for young men and women tempted by promises of wealth and power, the message is clear. Criminal organizations offer temporary gains bought with permanent consequences. Territory won through blood will be lost the same way. Alliances forged in violence dissolve into violence. Power built on fear cannot escape fear. The rise of CJNG demonstrates that in Mexico's criminal underworld, there are no winners, only survivors waiting for their turn to fall. El Mencho may remain free today, but every day in hiding is another day closer to the inevitable end that comes for all who build empires on blood. The only question is whether that end comes from rivals, from authorities, or from the same betrayal that elevates criminal leaders in the first place. Either way, the outcome remains unchanged. The cartel power that seems absolute today will be gone tomorrow, leaving behind only destroyed lives, devastated communities, and another cautionary tale in Mexico's brutal drug war.